So today we're going to talk about the United States Constitution. In the last two videos, we talked about how we got rid of the Articles of Confederation because they were too weak, which we set them up that way because we were rebelling against a strong king. We talked about the compromises, and so now we're really going to look at what our U.S. Constitution is composed of. And so on your notes, you should have where it's designated that we have three different parts to the United States Constitution. The very first part that we have is the preamble. And a preamble is an introduction. Just like what I just gave you is a preamble, where I just kind of talked about, just what's going to happen. And then we have the meat of the argument or of the Constitution, and those would be our 7 articles. And then finally, we have our amendments. Now, when our Constitution first ended up ratified, it was under the agreement that we would have the Bill of Rights added, and so those would be our first 10 amendments. So the Bill of Rights were all ratified at the same time, 1791. And then later, over time, 17 additional amendments were added. But the most of what we're going to talk about in this video is going to be the preamble, and then we're going to talk about the articles. So, you can watch that on your own time. The United States preamble is right here. And if you look at it and you notice, I want you to try to find out how many sentences is this. It's 1. So it's a long sentence to be 1 sentence. When we look at what are the 6 goals of the Constitution, when we're looking at the 6 goals, we want to make sure that we have a more perfect union. That's our first goal. Our second, we want to establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility. So the domestic meaning house, like home, and then peace. So we want peace in our country. We want to provide for common defense. So we're talking about military. We want to promote the general welfare. And we say welfare, we're not really talking about, we're not talking about food stamps welfare. We're talking about making sure people are healthy and happy. And we want to make sure that we have the blessings of liberty to not only ourselves, but also our posterior, which means the people who come after us, aka our children. So is this a good introduction for our government? And if you had to rewrite the preamble, which would probably be a good idea for you to practice, how would you rewrite those 6 goals? When we look at our Constitution, this is a really helpful document, and so we are going to go over it using the notes that we have. So hopefully you've got where we've got this part taken care of, and now we're looking at this part. So Article 1 talks about the legislative branch. Now what they did is they organized this in order of importance, and the fact that Article 1 discusses the legislative branch is a big deal. Article 1 is the longest article. And so there are 5 key terms that you really need to make sure that you know for sure. Now, of course, I feel like if you need to look these up even further, then I welcome you doing that. But I'm going to go over each of these terms really quickly. The first one, legislate, we're talking to make laws, and that's their job. We have Congress. Congress is going to be in Article 1, and their job is to make the laws. The second term that we're looking at is the elastic clause, which has an AKA, and it's called the necessary and proper clause. The necessary and proper clause, AKA the elastic clause, allows our government, our Congress, to make laws that they deem necessary. So in 1789, they had no idea that we would need a seatbelt law one time because we didn't have cars. So for there to be a national seatbelt law would fall under the elastic clause. What gives Congress the right to make additional laws? And it would be this elastic clause that gives Congress the power to make laws that they didn't know that they were going to need. This elastic means it's flexible, that it can do more. And this ends up being a very, very big deal. What gives Congress the right to have an Air Force? It comes from the elastic clause. It says that the legislative branch can maintain a militia, but does a militia include the Air Force? Well, they'll use the elastic clause to get away with that. The writ of habeas corpus, number 3 right here, the writ of habeas corpus means that before somebody can be tried, you have to produce the body. As corpus means body, habeas means have to, and so the writ of habeas corpus says that you have to be told what you did wrong in person before you are put in a trial. Ex post facto, means that you cannot be tried for or held accountable for something that wasn't against the law when you did it. So say they don't have a speed limit on the road that goes in front of a Target, and you get pulled over, and the officer tries to give you a ticket for that. Well, if you say there's no signs on this road that tell me that, and he says, oh, we're going to put up the signs tomorrow. They can't do that. That's not how that works. It has to be posted, what the speed limit is in an area. And generally it'll say like 35 miles an hour in Greenville or something. And then we have bills of attainder. Bills of attainder, the way that I remember this one is we got 2 T's over here. And that helps me remember that it stands for trial. And it says that you have to have a trial. So this one says you have to be told what you did wrong. And this one says that you have to have a trial. Ex post facto, you have to be told you can't be charged for a crime that wasn't against the law when you did it. Article 2 talks about the executive branch, and they have the right to enforce the laws. So Article 1, we're making the laws. Article 2, we're talking about the president, and they have the right they have the job to enforce the laws. So when it comes to like something like the Affordable Care Act, or better known as Obamacare, Congress wrote that law, and then the president is responsible for enforcing that law. Now, there is something called the rule of law, and the rule of law says that no one is above the law. Now, because the job of enforcing laws is a really, really big responsibility, the cabinet was created in order to help advise the president on how to do that effectively. So George Washington had 4 people in his cabinet, and it is now expanded to there are 15 secretaries. 14 secretaries, 1 attorney general, and they help the president enforce the laws, them and a lot of other people. So we have legislative, executive, and now on Article 3, we're talking about the judicial branch. The judicial's job we're talking about courts and judges, and their job is to interpret the Constitution. And to interpret these laws, so that when we're looking at these 3 branches of government, we have someone who's supposed to make the laws, someone to enforce, and someone to interpret. The reason why they're going to break up these powers is to make sure that nobody is too powerful, because they're still worried about that tyrant. So that's their philosophy. Now, Article 4, notice what the Roman numeral for 4 is. Article 4 talks about states and making sure that we have good relationships between states. It says that every state must be a republic, that we cannot have, the California can't decide they're going to have a dictatorship run by Arnold Schwarzenegger or something. It also underlines or explains the full faith and credit clause, and what that says is that states must respect the laws of other states. So say, for example, say I was 15 years old and I wanted to get married when I was 15 to someone who was 25. In the state of North Carolina, that would not be legal at all. However, if I had gone to South Carolina and they did allow that, then I could get married there. Now, if I get married in South Carolina, can I come back to North Carolina and am I married? Well, the full faith and credit clause says, yes, indeed, you are married. It's just like a high school diploma or a driver's license. If I have a driver's license from Virginia, does that mean that I can drive anywhere in the country? Yes, because of the full faith and credit clause. There's also something I want you to add here, and that's called extradition. Extradition says that states must respect other states, and so if a criminal runs away from, say, Kentucky, and he is found in Texas, then Texas must give this criminal back to Kentucky. Article 5, the V stands for 5, talks about how to amend the Constitution. And amend means to change. Now, this is not where we keep our amendments. However, this is where we talk about how we can change our Constitution. And there are two ways to change our Constitution. First, you have to have either 2/3 of Congress or 2/3 of states have to ratify. Long story short, 2/3 of Congress or 2/3 of states in order to suggest or propose a change. And then, in order to ratify, or ratify means to approve, in order to ratify one of those amendments, like say we wanted to make alcohol illegal, if you wanted to make that happen in part of our Constitution, it would either have to be 3/4, which is 75%. 75% of states would have to say, yes, we would want to make alcohol illegal, or it could be 75% of states at a convention. So 2/3, which is 66%, in order to just propose a change, and then 75% in order to actually make it happen. They wanted to make sure they had a clear majority before anything changed. Article 6 talks about the National Supremacy Clause, and that says the United States Constitution is supreme above all and everything else, that there is no document higher than the United States Constitution. And then Article 7 talks about ratification and said that they had to have 9 out of 13 states in order to approve the Constitution. Now they did get all 13 eventually, although it didn't happen immediately, but they didn't want to say that every state had to approve it right away, because otherwise, well, it's really impossible to get everybody to agree on everything all at the same time. So if you need to look up any of these words further, I hope you do so. Let's come back to, and I think that's it for this unit today.